Chapter 9, Section 1, Powers of the President. The presidency is fascinating because we see that person almost on a daily basis, yet there's a lot of misunderstanding as to the powers of the president. On one hand, we understand that the president has limited powers because we see sometimes the frustrations of the president when they want something. Congress isn't giving it to them. But we sort of assume the president has these dictatorial powers to just sort of make things happen. So there is a lot of misunderstanding out there, and candidates, as they run for president, feed into this by making campaign promises, by saying, I will. And probably the better phrase is, I will, in working with Congress, make this happen. But that's too complex, and that isn't as forceful of a statement. People respond to positions of strength. And the reality is we've created a position that's incredibly powerful, yet there's severe limitations to it. And so that's what we're going to try to figure out here. So the Constitution does have some powers described as head of the executive branch. There are tremendous powers there. And that's where we see a lot of it happening, where the president just does something. You're like, whoa, what happened? Well, that was allowed within the constitutionally defined powers. Now, tradition, because there's silence in a lot of areas on the Constitution, a lot of times, the first time something happens, that often becomes the tradition for later down the road. So we've seen presidents sometimes say, hey, the Constitution doesn't say anything, therefore I can do this. Okay. And we've also seen presidents take tremendous steps during wartime crisis where, wow, this is life or death for the country. We think of the Civil War or World War II. It was everybody had to mobilize to make this happen. And the president really had to step forward to do some things that were, looking back on it constitutionally, it really didn't seem to give the president that power. Now, when presidents get an overwhelming vote, meaning they win by a landslide, and by the way, the Electoral College has the way that system is built tends to make it look like a person won by a landslide. And so again, it's winner take all. Whoever wins the most votes in the state gets all of the Electoral College votes for that state. So if you win by one person in every state, you've won every state, and therefore it looks like you won by a landslide. But the idea being, if a person wins overwhelmingly, then there seems to be an upwelling of emotion and support for the president, which should empower the president to get more done. And that is called the mandate. And we can see some pictures here of different points in history with the president. Key times when the president was utilizing the power. Here we have the president entering Marine One. That's the helicopter. You can see the Marines saluting the president, and that's president as commander in chief. Even though the president is a civilian, the president is at the top of the military structure, and that's why any service member would have to salute the president. Here we see President Clinton meeting with the leaders of Palestine and Israel, and again, this has been ongoing, trying to get the peace process moving in the Middle East. And a lot of times countries will look to the United States to be a powerful mediator, bring force parties to the table that don't want to come to the table. Here we have President Reagan meeting with Gorbachev in a state visit. You can see the Statue of Liberty in the background. This is President Bush back when he was vice president. This is H.W. Bush, the elder Bush, when he was vice president. And, that just the power of the president. And Reagan was key in enabling Gorbachev to push through some of the very things that brought about his own downfall, but also brought about the fall of communism. And finally, we have the very moment when President Bush, W., was told by his chief of staff about the 9/11 bombings. At the very time, he was reading to children in an elementary school, and it's like, Mr. President, we got to go. There's been this horrible thing, and immediately things start moving very quickly in an emergency. So the president has tremendous powers when it comes to crisis or emergency. Okay, there are limits. Okay, and we've talked about that before. Congress has tremendous power to override a veto. The courts themselves, and again, they can also remove a president from power. Although that's very rare, there is a certain check there. Just the idea that that's possible, that limits the president. You don't want to do something that could lead to that, so you don't do it, and that's a good thing. Just the threat of an impeachment is very powerful. Again, the courts can overrule an action, and again, just the threat of that, president doesn't want to lose face in having that happen, and so you want to avoid things that are illegal, want to avoid things that may lead to an impeachment. Or a court override, and so that's a good thing. And then we talked about in a previous chapter that each of the departments of the government is a large organization with its own goals and ambitions and its own sort of history. And we use this phrase, bureaucratic memory, organizational memory. That once people sort of learn how things are done, it's very difficult to change things. And the bureaucracy itself isn't always very responsive to the president. So that actually limits the president's power to make change. And then the people themselves, there are times when the president wants to do something. If the people don't want it, that isn't usually going to happen. And the president is often very aware of what people want through public opinion polling. This crazy graph shows a lot of things. Shows approval ratings, and we can see that a lot of presidents early in their term are very popular, but over time, we Americans tend to get tired of our presidents as their term wears on. We can see, here's W. Oops, let me go back here. Here's W getting a spike in approval. This is shortly after September 11th, and again, he responded fairly well in a position of strength and, made some moves that assured people, and there was an upwelling in patriotism immediately after. But then you can see the slow, steady erosion of his support over time. And it's amazing. It's amazing to know that at one point, President Bush had the highest approval rating of all recent presidents. That's an amazing thing. Now, where he ended, again, slightly higher than many. You can see how John Kennedy ended higher. He kind of on an upswing there. But that's an important thing to sort of understand as a person moves through their presidency. That's one of the reasons why we have term limits. Okay, there are multiple roles. And this is an interesting thing. These things can often be happening at the same time. It's not like the president says, well, okay, now I'm going to be head of state, and then in an hour I'll be chief executive. No, these things are all happening all at the same time, and so our president has to represent us and be our symbol. When somebody's going to meet with another country, the top official that can meet with another country is our president. In other countries, such as the United Kingdom, the Queen could meet with a leader. Now, the Queen has no political power, but a lot of symbolic power, and so that matters. And so, but in America, the head of state and the chief executive has been combined into one person. And so there's a lot of power there. We've talked about pardons and reprieves and amnesties, and those are ways in which the president has some power over the judicial system. Remember, that's for federal court cases only. Executive orders, the president has the power to order the executive branch to do things as long as it's within legal guidelines, but that does give the president quite a bit of power to move things. Impoundment's no longer allowed. Okay, and again, if something's been approved by Congress, the president has to follow through on that. An executive privilege allows the president to limit White House communications, limit what they say. Now, court case United States versus Nixon, which we read about, limits that power, but for the most part, the president does have executive privilege. Okay. Other positions, if there is a president, then that for a particular party, then the president is naturally going to be the party leader. The party out of power, the party that doesn't have a president, that's often very, very vague. It's one of the reasons that makes it very difficult sometimes in an off-year election for that out of power party to get things done. And it's just amazing. The amount of power that a president has is pretty amazing when you think about it. As commander-in-chief, when military action has been approved by Congress, president has tremendous power. Now, in an emergency, the president can act. But there are limits as to how long that action can happen. If it's not approved by Congress, then it's going to have to be brought back.